Members are reminded that the meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube pages. Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
We have apologies from Councillors Butler and Hodgson-Jones.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Is there an agreement that I sign the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 25th of January 2023? All those in favour? Thank you. Item 2, members' interests. Do members have any interests to declare this evening, please? No interests? Thank you. Moving to item 3 of the agenda, I'd like to invite Lisa Jablonska to present the report, variation to Article 7 of the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall at your council meeting on the 29th of March, you considered a report by the Independent Remuneration Panel for a revised scheme of members' allowances. So within that scheme, it made provision for a new post of Assistant Deputy Executive Leader. As a result of that, there was an amendment at the council meeting as well to make provision for coming back to yourselves as members of the Corporate Governance Committee to make provision in the Constitution for the creation of this new role. To reflect the recommendations of the IRP. So it's within your gift as Corporate Governance Committee to obviously consider and review the Constitution. So the purpose of this report is obviously to make a recommendation to amend the Constitution. So the report itself contains an Appendix A, which is the role profile of the role of Assistant Deputy Executive Leader. And Appendix B details and the proposed amendments to the Constitution to reflect this new role. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have any questions? Councillor West, thank you.
Chairman, I didn't approve of this at full council. I don't approve of it now. Am I allowed to express that and withhold support? I don't want to be accused of living in the past, but I mean, both roles are very challenging. I realise that, and you do need to work hard. I accept that. But this hasn't, to my knowledge, since the council was formed, to have had an assistant deputy executive leader. And I can't really see the point now. I would have thought that if they require some support, the executive leader and its deputy, surely they can come within the ranks. It doesn't need a special responsibility allowance or a special role. So, Chairman, I certainly shan't be supporting it, but I'll take advice on where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor West. Any further questions? Okay, I think it would be just worth reminding councillors, members of the committee, that it was intrinsic in the joint agreement that the role be created, and there was allowance within the budget for the role ahead of signing the agreement. It went to independent review, need for constitution change. The independent reviewers recommended that the role be adopted, and this is tonight to act on the recommendation. In case there's any unclarity. Councillor Kadewere.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to elaborate that since it is a new joint administration and the role, actually I can see that it is important, because for the administration to work well, that means all parties should be inclusive. And according to the Constitution, I read and I see that it is allowed and it is permissible. And also, as you have mentioned, that the review board have actually recommended it can be done. So I will recommend people to vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gray?
Well, it'll come as no surprise that I don't agree with that. I fully support Councillor West in the comments that he has made. The independent review panel is a complete red herring. They were simply reviewing what they were told to review. They didn't come up with the idea that there was going to be one. I think Councillor Wells, you probably hit on the issue more closely when you said it was part of the joint agreement. In fact, as I've mentioned to Lisa, I'm unhappy because when the independent review panel spoke to me, they didn't even talk to me about this particular post and what I thought about this post, which further underlines, I'm afraid, this, I think I used the word shoddy report that came out with regards to that, full stop. So, I mean, the reality is that you can call cabinet members whatever you want, and I've seen so many iterations of people who are responsible for health and leisure, open spaces, you know, virtually every permutation under the sun. So if you wish to call a member of the cabinet an assistant deputy leader, then there's nothing to stop anyone doing that. My bigger contention here is which of you on the other side of this table or at the head of this table went to your electorate and said, I've got a really good idea. Let's introduce a new paid post costing the taxpayer £6,000 over the course of an electoral cycle. Isn't that a jolly good idea? It's very important for the operation of democracy. And the answer to that, of course, is absolutely none of you did that. But by the sounds of things, I can see the direction of travel that we're heading in this evening. So I think you touched on it rather well, Councillor Wells. This is the democratic overhead, shall we say, of a joint administration. The Conservatives have run this authority for however many years we have. I think 2000 was when the cabinet system came in. And the reality is, and I'm not decrying the individual who holds this particular post, there's always a reality that some cabinet members carry a heavier responsibility than others with regards to the balance of the work. And I've seen that ebb and flow over time. It's very clear that the deputy leader has a role. The leader, you know from the comments I made at council, what I feel about the leader's role and the importance of that role as we go through there. But I'm really unclear, other than that this is political expediency, and I think Councillor Cadaway really touched on that we actually need to reward a member of the coalition with effectively an extra allowance. And I just don't think that's in the public interest. I don't think that's what your fairness methodology and mantra actually backs up. And I challenge you to consider whether or not this is the best use of taxpayers' money.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Sanderson.
Chair, I think Councillor Gray is reaching a little bit. Some of the points he makes, that's his role, of course. I'd remind the committee that we haven't actually appointed the maximum number of cabinet members. I wasn't asked about this new post either when I gave evidence to the remuneration panel. I'd also point out that the previous administration increased their own allowances. They put in a supplement for the combined authority work and actually cut allowances for the then opposition. So it does cut both ways. But I think it's also important to remember that, we talk about interests of the taxpayer, and of course we take that very carefully into account. The last administration appointed assistant cabinet members. That's been withdrawn. They did make a recommendation for the leader of a minor opposition group. Well, of course, we don't have that. So there have been savings in other ways. So I think it's pretty clear where Councillor Gray's coming from. I can understand there's a perfectly clear job description in our appendix. And I think that this is a good move. And I think it will help the council to run more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Any further questions or comments? Okay, if not, then we'll conclude the discussion, and I need a show of hands. A, to endorse a variation to Article 7 of the Council's Constitution as outlined in Appendix B of the report now submitted, and B, to recommend to Council the necessary variation be made to the Council's Constitution. Can I see all those in favour, please? And those against? Any abstentions? I think we've got everybody. Yeah, thank you.
Chair,
Councillor Gray.
before we go on, can I just point out that with the previous managing director, right at the beginning of this year, I asked that the Constitution be reviewed with regards to improving the democratic accountability of this council with regards to the appointing shadow cabinet roles. That question was asked of you in council by Councillor Ross Martin as to when that was going to come forward. Yeah. So it seems slightly odd that we've managed to get this through this evening, but we haven't quite got around yet to improving democratic accountability, which I think is widely acknowledged as being needed, because we haven't really been in a situation where such a large single party has been in opposition. And can I ask you to take that away with the interim managing director to advance that? Because I think we need to be clear about that particular role, and it's certainly something that Mrs. Lancaster agreed with me, and I think Mr. Morley agrees as well.
So, as you rightly say, Councillor Martin raised a question at full council. Councillor Martin received a response from the then managing director. Some elements of protocol and procedure were highlighted and were updated and were distributed amongst councillors for their understanding and for their improved playthrough in meetings. However, the bigger question of updating the Constitution was felt to be a fairly significant piece of work, and I think there's a question as to how or when that could be factored into the otherwise busy schedule of the council. Lisa, can you comment on that? Thank you.
If I can come in, Chair, and certainly if Councillor Grace, if I'm understanding what you want reflected in there is the reflection of the recognition of the shadow cabinet as well. I mean, certainly, as this report was stated, it's within your gift as Corporate Governance Committee to review the Constitution, to update the Constitution. So that's certainly something that can come back through this route again, in the same way as we've updated it to reflect this new role that's come as a result of the joint administration. So through you, Chair, I mean, I'm quite happy to put together a report in conjunction with the Managing Director as well, and we can obviously speak further on that outside of the meeting. So.
Thank you, Lisa. Oliver.
Yes, so it's fair to say that Councillor Gray has raised the issue with me. We can take that away and have a look, and as Lisa said, consider that as a piece of work that could be brought forward in the future.
Chair, can I just ask what actually Councillor Gray has in mind here in terms of recognising shadow cabinet members?
What isn't clear at the moment is what access shadow cabinet members have to officers and what role they play within the council at this particular point in time. So I think that it ought to be clear about what kind of access that they have to council officers in order to scrutinise what you're doing as an executive. Now, you didn't get round to appointing a shadow cabinet when you were in opposition. That's fine. We have got round to appointing one. And I think Mrs. Lancaster was very clear with me, and I'm sure Mr. Morley, well, I won't speak for Mr. Morley, he can perfectly well speak for himself. But there clearly needs to be rules of engagement around what the shadow cabinet do with, for example, the officers that are here this evening. Are they allowed to meet them once a month? Are they allowed to not talk to them at all? Are they allowed to, how much of their time are they allowed to consume? What advice are they allowed to receive? And I think that given that when I went through the the discussion that you were talking about with regards to the members' allowance, the one thing that, I sort of said, look, I'm pretty agnostic about the leader of the opposition's allowance. As far as I'm concerned, you can do what you want with it. Their response was, that's one of the only allowances in law that exists, because it's important to have an effective opposition. And I think it's important that we reflect how the opposition ought to operate constitutionally within the council.
All I can say is when I tried the same thing in your position, the then leader of the council was not in any way interested in that. So I hope you have better luck than I did.
Thank you, councillors. All right, so we've had a commitment from Lisa to assist with that, so we'll go forward. Thank you for that. So we'll now move on to item 4, which is the external audit report for the 2021-22 statements of accounts. And can I ask Karen, please, to present the report? Thank you.
Good evening. This evening's papers all relate to the annual accounts for 21-22, so not the year just finished, the prior year. We distributed the external audit report a week back, but I must point out that our audit is still ongoing, and so there are still changes happening to that. So we have a couple of guests here this evening. I'd like to introduce Mark Hodgson, who is the audit partner from EY, and Andrew Paler, who is the audit manager. And I'm now going to pass across to them to talk you through the report and their findings.
Thank you, good evening. So before I move to the report itself, just a couple of key messages to provide a status update and to let you understand where we are with the audit and the timeline through to completion. So it's fair to say the audit's not where we planned for it to be as of today, when we were expecting to proceed to issuing an opinion tomorrow after you've gone through your due process as a committee this evening. But we're not in a position to do that for a number of reasons, and there are 3 primarily. So the first, as reflected in our report on page 5, is the identification of a new significant risk in relation to the implementation of a new payroll system for the financial year. That was information we weren't aware of when we issued our audit plan, and clearly requires a number of audit procedures to be undertaken around it, given the impact of data migration from one system to another, the operation of the system in the year, and noting that payroll is probably 70 to 80% of the council's expenditure, clearly a material system feeding a set of accounts. The second area is, through our testing that we were undertaking, is the identification of a potential issue with the fixed asset register and how valuation movements flow through it, and then the associated comprehensive income and expenditure statement and or revaluation reserve, depending on the direction of a valuation movement, so either up or down, and where it goes left and right, basically. This appears to be quite complex an issue, and to be able to understand both the nature and the extent of it is taking some time to resolve, and is an unexpected impact we weren't expecting when we planned the procedures. So both of those have required and are requiring additional considerations and work to gain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support a quality audit, and therefore to be able to issue a safe audit opinion. So whilst I am saying to you we're not where we planned to be, I'm not apologising for dealing with matters that came to our attention during the audit and discharging my professional responsibilities in undertaking a quality compliant audit. The third issue is in relation to a national issue impacting all local authorities on their 21-22 accounts that are yet to sign in relation to the pension liability. The issue being that there was a recent triennial valuation at the pension fund, which primarily is forward-looking over the next 3 years to identify how well funded the pension fund is, and therefore what contributions admitted bodies such as yours need to make to it to keep it at the funding level required. That forward look builds on an actuarial model that has a number of assumptions in it, and came into play from the 1st of April 22. a day after your balance sheet date. However, in the actuarial triennial valuation, there are a number of assumptions that are different from the report that supports the balance sheet date a day before. So we clearly need to understand what those assumptions are and whether they would drive a change in the liability on the balance sheet on the 31st of March. The theory of that issue has been resolved nationally, and it's now for auditors to undertake the necessary procedures to ensure that the accounts for the 31st of March are correct. So Karen has requested an updated actuarial report for the 31st of March, and clearly we then need to see what that says and then work through the remaining procedures and any updates to the financial statements as a consequence. So clearly that's a key matter as well. And depending what the actuarial report says will depend on the extent of procedures required. It may highlight no changes, which would clearly be good, but it may highlight a material change in which we need to understand the drivers for that change and then any accounting adjustments to your financial statements. Also acknowledge that the audit did commence later than we planned due to other overrunning audits, but the lost time has been made up in the audit period we've been with you. So overall our input resource to it is as planned, but clearly we have now had additional procedures to lay over the top of that, which is why we're not able to proceed to signing off this evening. So turning to the report itself, on page 5, we set out the materiality level, which remains at 1.93 million as was reported in our audit plan, and that's based on the draft financial statements. And we are reporting any audit differences above £97,000 to you through that process. On the same page, we do set out that we have that new significant risk in relation to the payroll system, which I described earlier. At the bottom of that page, there is a status of audit work, and in it a number of procedures that were outstanding at the date that we issued the report last week, and there has been some movement which I can update you on as a committee. So in relation to non-domestic rate appeals, we have now received the supporting information for the calculation from management, and we're just running through that to understand how they got to the provision rate and ensure that that is a prudent approach to take. In relation to the payroll and the new identified risk, we have performed the system conversion testing that is complete, and the migration data appears to be correct, but we're working through the remaining starters and levers testing to ensure that data in the new system is also correct and that trend analysis between the 2 years is not highlighting any significant anomalies. The biggest area to be completed is the third area around property, plant and equipment valuations and investment property valuations. We have highlighted a number of issues later on in the report with the work that we've done to date, but the biggest areas remain in understanding the methodology that your valuer has taken in relation to car parks and why that has changed this year from previous years. So that is driving what appears to be quite a potential difference in valuation approach. So, for example, I think that Huntingdon multi-storey car park apparently has no building on it and therefore has been reduced in value by 7.1 million, which we find rather hard to understand the basis of the methodology. So we are challenging the valuer on how that methodology has been deployed across all car park assets.
Karen, thank you.
So just picking up on that individual point, we were advised today by the auditors that we could get a second valuation from a different independent valuer for the car park, because we have gone back to our previous valuer several times and asked them to reconsider the valuation they put on it, and they were unwilling to change that. So we have today gone out to a separate valuer and asked them to provide an independent valuation of the car park so that we have a different basis to go back and compare the accounts on.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, and then the other property, plant and equipment procedures are the ones I described earlier in relation to the fixed asset register and the way that information flows through it. The fourth area in terms of journals, we have completed the journal testing in relation to our fraud risks, so that's all complete with no issues to bring to your attention. There are a number of procedures to complete in relation to year-end close-down journals where they impact on work that I've just described as being outstanding, because clearly they flow through to the accounts. And then the last area, in terms of value for money, we have completed and not identified any risks of significant weakness. So that will then flow into no matters to report when we come to our audit opinion. Out of that work that I've just updated you on, there are no new adjusted or unadjusted audit differences than those that are sitting in the report as of today. But I would say that the pensions issue and the property, plant and equipment issues have the potential for further amendments. So as of today, or the date of the report and today, on page 9, there are 5 adjusted audit differences, of which only one is material, so the 4th one. The rest on there are not material but are above our reporting threshold to you. And there is one disclosure issue in relation to updates to the annual governance statement for omitted disclosures, and I see that there's an updated annual governance statement on the agenda as well. So I would probably move through to concluding by saying we will be requiring a letter of representation at the time of signing. We have made a standard request, which is one of the appendices, and the Council's potential response to that is, again, an agenda item this evening. That is where we are with the audit. We do need to perform and undertake the procedures that are set out to be in a position to conclude and sign our audit opinion. Management have been very cooperative so far and supported us, as Karen said, by going out to both the actuary for the updated pension report and indeed thinking about the need for engaging a second external valuer to have a look at the car park valuation methodology. And we'll work through those outstanding procedures as quickly as we can, because we'd like to sign your audit as fast as we are possibly able, but they are 2 quite big areas in there, in pensions and property, plant and equipment, to resolve. So we're happy to provide an updated and final audit results report when those procedures have been concluded and talked about, depending on how you proceed with your recommendation from this agenda item. Clearly happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hodgson. Any questions for Mr. Hodgson, the external auditors? It's Councillor West.
Chairman, I hope this don't sound disagreeable or grumpy. I hope you'll think of it as my innocence because of my young age and my inexperience. But what I can never understand is every year I've sat on this committee, the audit report has never been completed on time. I can't remember an occasion. In fact, when Councillor Ball was in the chair, we even had to have an extra meeting. And what I can't understand is, you say that by a day we missed the budget, by the pension, I think by a day or something, from different figures after a day. What I can't understand is, and maybe Chairman, the 151 officer can enlighten me, or the auditor himself can enlighten me, but what I can't understand is, how do we miss a day of getting some information which causes these delays, which in turn must cost us additional money as an authority?
That's a fair question. Any response from internally or externally to that?
So I'm happy to respond to that. So the day in my example is because you have a balance sheet date upon which you report your assets and liabilities, and that has your pension liability in it. That is an actuarial statement as of the 31st of March. It just so happens that from the following day, the triennial report for the next 3 years of funding becomes extant because it runs on a 3-year rolling period, and that happens to be the 1st of April this time, following this balance sheet date. What I'm saying is there is information in that triennial review that we need to ensure had been taken into account in the previous valuation at the 31st of March. It just so happens it crosses over midnight for this particular issue, which is unfortunate, admittedly, but that is the way of the world, and we do have to consider everything that could impact the liability at the date of the balance sheet. Equally, there have been significant national issues over the last 3 years and more of delays to audits for a number of reasons which have been reported in the press, taken to Public Accounts Committee nationally, and are being looked at by lots of bodies in central government and supporting agencies. What is important to me, and hopefully important to you as a committee, is that you have the right set of accounts that have the right financial position for you as a council, that have been rigorously audited to international standards, with the right audit opinion being issued upon them at the time I am happy to issue said opinion. And we have worked as hard as we can to get it done in the window we agreed with Karen and the team, but because of the additional procedures we need to do over the 3 areas that I highlighted, we're not able to complete it as we had thought 6 months ago. So that is where we are.
Every year we go through this where it's late for one reason or another, and I can't understand why you get something on the 31st of March, something on the April the 1st. I can't understand why it's not all aligned. I mean, you've got some very experienced people really dealing with these issues, and I can't understand why it weren't aligned, that you got everything was together on the 31st of March, so you could just think, here we are, get on with it, and then it could be dealt with. Or is that just being simplistic and silly?
Definitely not silly. But I'm not an actuary either, so I can't speak for another profession. But we are talking about, or my example and the pensions issue is 2 different looking documents. So one is backward looking about the liability at a date in time, and one is forward looking about funding. And it just so happens that they come in a line, one after each other, and you can't line them up, because one is forward-looking and one has to be at a specific hour on the 31st of March. So it is the way the model works as opposed to a simplistic approach to it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions for external auditors? Councillor Gray.
Thank you very much. Yes, we've been here before in terms of once upon a time we were going to get audits. Everything was going to be signed off by the 30th of September. That was the brave new world of the 2010s. And we never quite got there, did we? So I think I have 2 questions. Firstly, a fairly direct question, which I think hopefully you'll be able to answer. I've looked through here. I can't see anything here. You know, I'm kind of guessing payroll. Normally payroll gets fairly accurate because people, you know, are fairly focused on what it is that they're actually being paid. So you've obviously got your audit work to do there, but I wouldn't anticipate that will cause too many problems. We've talked about property already. I don't see anything in the documentation that I've read that gives me sort of great cause for alarm. Are you able to confirm my reading of the situation there? And then if I may, Chairman, as supplementary.
So I think you're right. I think we would have heard from staff members if the payroll had been materially incorrect, but clearly we need to understand the procedures to get the assurances, so I don't think that would lead to a significant item. Might be control weaknesses, but numerically for a set of accounts, unlikely. The pension issue, I think, might lead to a material change in the liability, but that is what it is, and it will be a number that is directed by the actuarial report, so that is going on an expert. I think the bigger issue are the property, plant and equipment issues. One, understanding the basis of valuation for the car parks and making sure the assumptions used are recognisable as industry standard and follow due process and the Red Book approach, and understanding why it's just land and not a building on it, because I don't in my simplistic head currently. But the fixed asset register might take some more unpicking, because that is the key document, if you like, because it is an Excel spreadsheet as it currently is, that holds all of your information about every asset that you own and what's happened to it over a period of time. So it's valuations on day one, every up and down movement every year since then to get to the current valuation. And it may be that there are some elements in there that weren't meant to be in the right in the year it is, or corrected subsequently, and making sure that document is right, and therefore driving the right balance sheet valuation is key, because I understand you're going to change to a new updated fixed asset module in a year or two's time, and having the right entry points and data for that, I think, is clearly key. So on the whole, I would say it is a positive audit results report, but I would withhold comment on property, plant and equipment until we have a better picture and understanding of that particular issue.
Thank you, Karen. If you may carry on.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification? The issues with property, plant and equipment has no impact upon the net book asset value. It's purely to do with how the impairments and revaluations have been allocated out.
That side flows through reserves, so yes, but the car park issue clearly does have the potential to impact on year-end valuations.
Yeah, understand about the car park, and you know we do pay third parties to undertake this work for us. We do rely on their expertise, and it is disappointing that we are going back to them over a year after they did the valuations to challenge them, and we do have different valuers in place now, so that has caused us a few issues.
Thank you, Karen. Councillor Gray, further question?
So, yeah, I mean, obviously, points all taken. Thank you very much. And Karen, I'm sure the fixed asset register will continue to haunt your dreams for some time to come yet. And you're absolutely right. If we're going to go onto a new system, we may as well make sure that we're starting from the right point. Otherwise, we're going to get in a terrible muddle. So I suppose, Chair, and you may be fully furnished with this, you know, we're clearly not at the stage we hoped we would be tonight. So where do we go from here, I think, is the question, because we don't want to find ourselves in a South Cam situation where, you know, we've got endless years of account not signed off, and, you know, we're clearly keen to progress this, but at the appropriate pace.
So what you're asking, if I'm understanding correctly, is what sort of schedule, what sort of time interval can we expect to happen before finalisation happens? Is that right?
Well, I suppose I'm asking, are you asking of us any delegations to you or any delegations to management here to do anything, or is this going to roll over now until the next committee meeting?
Karen, thank you.
So what have I proposed as far as delegations go? The accompanying documents, one of them is a letter of representation. I ask that you delegate responsibility to me to sign that once we get the audit opinion. I'm also asking for the chair and myself to be delegated responsibility to sign the accounts, assuming that the accounts are unqualified and there are no material differences to them. If we are subject to material differences, then I believe they should come back to committee to explain what those differences are. And certainly, I would never want to sign a qualified set of accounts, so I would need to explain that.
Thank you, Karen. Are you happy with that response?
Sorry, we're live. I'm happy with that, Chairman, although, you know, it might be useful to understand what you mean by materiality.
So it's materiality as far as the EY audit definition goes, and I've completely forgotten what the figure is off the top of my head, so I shall pass back to Mark to clarify that.
So our materiality level is 1.93 million. Anything above that would impact our opinion potentially.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask a question about our statement of accounts for 21-22? It's the other appendix on this item. So the bottom of page 10 says nine tranches of LRSG totaling 16.3 million were received. Then it goes on to say that there was approximately 4.2 million remaining to repay to central government. Every effort was made to issue grants to all qualifying businesses. Do we know why all of that wasn't spent? I appreciate that was probably before your time, Karen, but handing money back to central government is not something we generally like to do, is it?
You're
Karen,
quite
thank you.
right. It is before my time, and I will need to go and get an answer to that too. So I will respond separately to that one for you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Karen, given that the audit of the 21-22 accounts is not yet complete, how confident are you in publishing the draft 22-23 accounts by the 31st of May deadline of this year?
I have to say, in all honesty, I am not confident. The deadline for publishing the accounts has been brought forward by 2 months. Last year we had to publish them by the end of July. This year it's been brought forward to the end of May. Given that we're now at the end of April, we have yet to finalise the 21-22 accounts, so we don't have a clear version of what our opening balances will be. And because the audit has run over what we expected, the audit started at the start of February, and the finance team focus has been on completing this audit work and not on closing out the year-end accounts. I'm not confident that we'll be in a position to present to you at the end of May a set of accounts that I personally, as Section 151, it is a personal commitment I have to give that those accounts are correct. I don't believe we will be in a position to be able to do that. I think there will be too much work remaining to be completed at that stage.
Thank you. Further questions, gentlemen, ladies? Right, quite. Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions, then we move to the need for a show of hands for the 4 items on your papers. Number 1, to receive the auditor's results report. Number 2, to give delegated powers to the executive leader and the managing director to sign the amended annual government statement on behalf of the council. Thirdly, to approve the letter of representation, Appendix 2, and to authorise the Director of Finance and Corporate Resources, Section 151 officer, to sign it on behalf of the Council. And fourthly, to give delegated powers to the Chairman of the Committee and Director of Finance and Corporate Services, as Section 151 officer, to authorise and sign the annual financial report for 2021-22, Appendix 3, on behalf of the Council, subject to the auditors confirming an unqualified opinion and there being no material adjustments. So can I see all those in favour of those recommendations, please? Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Yeah. Thank you, committee. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, the Internal Audit Charter. Deborah, would you please present the Charter report? Thank you.
Sure. Okay. The Internal Audit Charter is a requirement by the public sector internal audit standards. We previously did have one, and this isn't a simple refresh. This is a bit more of a rewrite. The standards actually say that we have to define the purpose, the authority, and the responsibilities of the audit service. And what I've done is I've taken the Institute of Internal Auditors model and their suggested coverage, and I've applied that and filled it out with all the details that we have at HDC. So, I mean, just running through some of the things that are incorporated into it, it basically acts as our terms of reference, really, to put it in lay terms. It defines the relationship we have with senior management, with yourselves as audit committee and other providers, external audit, and our shared service providers as well. It it defines our independence, our authorities, and states our activities. So primarily that's one of assurance functions that we carry out, and then secondary to that we have consultancy and advice work. It states also our resource and qualifications and training, and covers also our reporting techniques that we use. So that can be for individual assignments, basically an internal audit report that will be issued at the end of one of those. And I've included in there also the assurance opinions and the descriptors that go with each of those. And also then the reporting cycle that we have for reporting to senior management and again to yourselves as audit committee. I'm also required within the charter to inform you annually of our independence, our organisational independence, or else state to you where we do have any compromise there. So it will say in this version that we are organisationally independent, but there are also some areas that are listed in there that internal audit have traditionally or somewhere along the line have adopted some of these responsibilities. And a recent peer review has actually picked up that there's some amounts of work that we do which traditionally would sit outside or should sit outside of internal audit for independence purposes. I think at HDC and other councils, sometimes you do find that internal audit do these functions because they're best placed or there's no suitable alternative to pick up that work. But it has been identified, and now we're required to consider whether or not audit should be doing it or it should be given to Section 151 or monitoring officer instead to carry out. What we've put in the report now is for committee, you're required to approve the internal audit charter before it can go ahead. But we've also put a caveat in there to say that because the peer review has identified some of these areas, that we'd like you to give delegated approval to myself and Chair in consultation to make any amendments in light of the peer review suggestions. Do you have any questions? Hopefully it's a bit easier than the statement of accounts.
Any questions on this item? Councillor Gray. Yeah, I do have a couple of questions, but I wondered if you could just, Deborah, I didn't quite catch what you said right at the end there about peer review, and I wondered if you could explain it to us lay people in clearer terms.
So we recently had a peer review which is still under draft reporting, and in that they did identify that audit were carrying out these additional functions, whistleblowing, I've listed them in there, which as they've pointed out, it just normally sits outside of internal audit. So I've drawn attention to that specifically as that is subject to possible amendment.
Well, that probably neatly leads into my question or comment, Chair, if I may, which is, I mean, obviously, I have no problem with the charter. You've clearly taken it from somewhere else. You've amended it correctly for what we've got here. But my reflections on it are, you know, you're going to be doing an audit plan. You're going to scope. You're going to carry out the audits. You're going to come up with recommendations. You're going to monitor those recommendations. You're going to report on those recommendations. You're going to check on what's going on in the background. And it makes very clear in here that, you know, why are we doing all of this? Well, not just for the sake of our own health. We're doing it in order to make sure the business is operating properly and delivering the objectives that we set out to deliver. And I guess the 2 points I'd like to make, Chair, and I'd be interested in Deborah's reflections, are that looks like a lot of work. Do you have the resource that you need in order to do that? Particularly because the second part of it is we're going through a lot of organisational change. There's a new administration which has new business plans and priorities that are quite, in some cases, quite different from what was there before. There's a lot of similarities, but there are some differences. And so managing that change and seeing how that's being implemented, we've just talked about we've just adopted a new corporate plan. That's the business plan for the organisation. And it's quite a different look to the one that was there before. So do you feel confident with what is frankly extra workload, that you've got the resources that you need in order to carry out an audit plan to your satisfaction? And it could well be that, I don't want you to be the whistleblower on the whistleblower, but you may well be whistleblowing on yourself and saying, frankly, that needs to be put somewhere else because I've got more than enough to be doing here. I don't want to be sort of leading the witness, but I'm kind of giving you an opportunity in front of the managing director.
So, a lot of questions there. I think, first of all, I would say that normally at this stage, we would be bringing the internal audit plan. So those questions could possibly be more easily answered. At this stage, we've deferred the audit plan, again, in light of the peer review and also to realign it with the corporate risks that have been identified. So we will still try and structure it that we look at the key financial systems, the key controls and the governance areas to be able to give that full coverage of governance as well as looking at operational areas. But they will this time be very heavily, or hopefully will be heavily related and aligned to the strategic objectives and the risks for the council. So it does mean that probably the lighter things that we perhaps might have looked at before will now fall by the wayside. The other question as to resources, I am duty bound to say whether or not we have sufficient resources when we prepare the plan. At this stage, I can say we definitely do not at this stage, but that is because we are in a period of extreme lack of resource because of circumstances within the internal audit section that I don't necessarily need to go into, but I'm the only permanent person there. So at the moment, we're in limbo as to quite what's happening with resourcing.
Thank you, Deborah. Oliver.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Gray. So I think your reflections are fair in terms of the change of the corporate plan and the change of the objectives within that. And clearly, I think as Mrs. Moss has laid out, she's duty bound to come back and report about the level of capacity she has within the team. What I didn't think it would be fair to let your sort of question pass without reflecting is there are other sources of assurance within the organisation. And I think one of the points, and we're blessed with the presence of our Section 151 officer today, is we have enhanced, for instance, the amount of accountancy resource that we have within the organisation. We've also appointed a Chief Delivery Officer, which has really beefed up our resource and capacity around project management and governance and oversight in there. And we've also reviewed a number of our managerial meetings to bring greater assurance and focus on some of those controls and measures that you'd expect us to have good control on. So the level of resource within the internal audit team remains critical, and Mrs. Boss will come back and report on that. But I just wanted to give you that sense of the greater levels of assurance that we've beefed up elsewhere in the organisation at the same time.
Thank you. Councillor Hasler.
I just wanted to comment on the peer review, something that we instigated for a number of reasons, but we took the Local Government Association to produce an independent peer review, and one of the reasons for that was to make certain that, not in any way being critical of our audit function at all, but just to kind of kick the tires and just make certain that it is doing the things that you suggested, and that was why we've done that, and we're just digesting the reports. The report at the moment, and certainly I'll be discussing with Oliver as we move forward, and Deborah as well, to make certain that we're fully resourced and can. When the audit plan comes to this committee as well, you will also be able to look at that to see whether the coverage of the audit plan is going to cover off all the things that you as a committee feel that should be covered by audit. So it's another opportunity. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Any further questions on this agenda item? Councillor West.
Can I make a quick point, Chairman? I gave evidence to that pair group, so I hope I'm interested in what I have to say. The Council considers the Internal Audit Service to be a key component of governance framework. Very true, Chairman. But what I'd like to see, and maybe this is just being emotional, but what I'd like to see is that the whole culture of the organisation is to accept audit, to accept that you're asked to make changes, accepting this is not criticism, but sometimes you do things differently, you may get a better result. And I just wished it had been in there a bit more, but I'm not sure exactly how I write it, but I would like it to feel that there is that element where it is about the staff taking on board this additional protection, and it's protection for the senior management, it's protection for the members, it's protection for the staff if they get a sound audit which they work to and support. I'm just sorry that isn't more in the charter, but I'm not sure after saying that, Chairman, how I would write it in, but I'm sorry it's not there.
Thank you, Councillor. Any comment on that? Deborah, Oliver? Karen?
I'd actually like to counter on that to say it's not just internal audit, it's the wider governance function across the organisation, and that is certainly what we are trying to embed at the moment, and that is one of the reasons why we requested the peer review, to see whether we are operating effectively and were there recommendations to how we could improve that and help embed it together with further governance and risk management across the organisation. It's a cultural change that we want. It's not just ticking boxes.
Thank you. Deborah?
Yeah, and also to specifically add that there is a little sentence in the Charter that says senior management are responsible for ensuring that the agreed corrective actions are introduced. So, you know, the Charter is what internal audit will do rather than what the council will do, but it has made that distinction.
Thank you. Yes, that's useful. Any further questions on this item, please? Okay, in that case, we move to conclusion of the discussion, and you're asked by a show of hands to approve or otherwise to review and approve the internal audit charter, and to allow for any amendment following the peer review to be approved following consultation with the chair of the committee. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Let's see those again. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Moving on to item 6, implementation of internal audit actions. Deborah, we have your next item on the agenda. Could you please present this report to members? Thank you.
So this is the same report that you receive or have received at each meeting so far, so I won't run through the narrative, it remains the same. The statistics are the only thing really that have changed in there. So the important one is the top one, 67% have been implemented when we include those that were implemented on time or late. This is compared with 57% that was reported in January, so again an improvement. 18 actions that are still to be implemented, 18 are overdue, and then we just run down to the extra ones down there. So 20 have implemented since January, 73 have been closed overall in the year, and 42 remain open. I think probably what we need to do is now run on to just the 18 overdue actions, because that's what this report is about, really. So if I just give a couple of comments running down them, there's no red actions on there, so they're all amber, outstanding ones, overdue ones, although some of them have come from reports that overall were limited assurance reports, but the actions themselves are amber. You can see that the older ones now have been, I don't want to say closed off, but they have now been assigned different alternative, more realistic, up-to-date actions. And Karen has kindly reinvigorated the PCI ones, which I think she might tell you a little bit about now, to give that a little bit more of a kickstart and hope that we get some progress on that now.
So I have maybe foolishly agreed to take responsibility for trying to get us PCI DSS compliant across the organisation. Having looked at the actions and discussed them with our external PCI DSS consultants, it's become very clear that even if we implemented these actions, which have been outstanding since 2018-19, it would not achieve PCI DSS compliance for us as an organisation. So what we're going to do instead, well, first of all, I'm going to ask that we close out these actions. And secondly, we're going to commence a project looking at attaining channel compliance. There are 4 channels of PCI DSS, face-to-face, autonomous telephony, web-based or non-automated telephony. And we're going to seek to work on those, as I say, on a channel-by-channel basis, starting with the easier ones first, gain compliance across the organisation, and then work through those services where they're accepting card payments but they're not compliant at the moment, looking at whether we make system changes there, whether we make service changes, or whether we actually say we're no longer going to accept payment in this service. If somebody wants to make payment, then we're going to have to divert them to one of our compliant streams. So it's not going to be a quick fix. I'm not going to come back next month and say, yep, it's all sorted. But we have a plan for moving towards that, and we do believe it is attainable.
Okay, so just moving back onto a few more comments. I have this afternoon had confirmation that land charges has been implemented and closed off. Just nobody remembered to actually put the update on there. So that one can be ignored. It's disappointing that some people haven't taken the opportunity to provide you with an update on progress. So some of them on there are still from the January 23 report. I can't tell you whether that means they have made progress and failed to put an update on there, or whether they haven't actually done anything further. My own concern probably rests more with the small works contract, because there are 3 outstanding actions on there. And at the time we did the audit in May 21, we were considerably overspent outside of the contract, which is the potential breach of Code of Procurement as well. I think that does open the council up to a bit of risk of challenge from competitors as well. So to me, that is the one that we need to seek action on. We've spoken about it this afternoon. The resourcing in procurement is going to increase, but I do know it's probably needs a little bit of push from senior management, is my advice, to task somebody in the operations service department to actually make sure that the invitation to tender is designed so that procurement can put that out and get the contract underway. It doesn't feel as though, from my own point of view, it doesn't feel as though much progress is being made without a little bit more impetus somewhere. I would also like to suggest, possibly outside of this meeting, but it would be my suggestion that senior management are asked to include the management of actions as a standing item in their one-to-ones with managers. I feel that committee see this, and I know you've floundered sometimes as to what you can do with these actions, how to progress them. Do we call people in? What do we do? But my advice would be probably, before you go down that route, that I think we could try one-to-ones. If they have a standing item that they discuss anything that's outstanding, they all have access to the system that lists their own actions that are outstanding, so they can easily talk through them together in that meeting, and I hope that might progress a bit more action a bit faster anyway. Do you have any questions on any of them or any of the process?
Karen, do you want to come in now?
Sorry, can I just respond on that point on outstanding actions? We have now instigated an assurance board within the organisation, which is looking at governance. It's to take assurance from the controls that we have in place are actually working and improving how we deliver things. One of those items is looking at outstanding audit actions, and we will be calling managers into the board as a precursor potentially to coming here to explain what they are doing to close out those actions, whether there are any factors within the organisations that are stopping them from closing out those actions, and what help we can give as a board to helping to achieve those. So I would actually see that as being a stronger control going forwards.
Thank you, Karen. Excuse me. Thank you, Karen. That's useful. Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, Karen, thank you for taking on the PCI issue. We look forward to receiving regular updates, and good luck with that. And secondly, I just wanted to pick up with Deborah on the asset register, the IT assets. Is that not something we're 9 months into that? It involves the staff. Is that something that we can put pressure on, even by a managing director here? You know, this almost should be a quick win, and not 3/4 of a year to try to achieve.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get to that actual point. Is that the one on the gap, recording the gaps? I've actually spoken to the person responsible for that. That one can be cleared off, actually. I realised that was on there, and since this has been run, I've spoken to her, and it is, as far as I'm concerned, she's gone as far as she can with that, and all the staff are aware that they need to make sure that they're sequential. And in actual fact, when our new laptops come in, they have the numbers stuck on them now, and it's a little bit more, not automated, but not as easy to defeat the gaps.
Oliver, do you want to come in here?
I think it's fair to say, Deborah, as well, that the predominant action here was around peripherals rather than devices, and the control of screens and other consumables at the point of COVID, where devices went home, was one of the major considerations.
They didn't go as far as recording all the low-value peripherals. I think they limited it to docking stations, laptops, and I'm not even, I think screens may have been on there, but it's mainly the laptops that we needed to have the control over.
I think the point being that the control around the expensive devices was in place. It was more around those peripheral devices that was the issue. Work has been done, but in a range of areas that they're almost considered consumables in certain settings, you know, which, so I think it is, there is a materiality sort of point here, but I think the key consideration, the point Deborah's made, is that the action's being closed.
Thank you. Are you happy with that response, Councillor Bagwell? Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Gray?
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on your comment. I mean, my eyes also honed in on the small contracts, because obviously the procurement is a fairly heavily regulated activity for, well, for many organisations, but particularly public sector organisations. I really hope, Oliver, that you've kind of heard what's been said here this evening, because I'm pretty sure that everyone around this panel would agree with what Deborah has said with regards to kind of tightening up on that and making sure that you know, we are following the regs, and it's not just some kind of optional extra to do that. And before I let you respond to that, if I may, Chair, the other point that I would agree with, and I take the point you made, Karen, around a sort of wider board to kind of look at these actions and what have you. But I do think it kind of plays into culture, an issue around culture and management, is that if people have been given actions to deal with, they should be dealing with those actions, and managers should be holding them to account to deal with those actions in a timely manner. And I'm sure that's something that's the kind of excellence that we all aspire to, and I'm sure you will make sure that permeates through the organisation.
Absolutely. So simply, yes, I absolutely give that commitment. I think the points I would just draw attention to is, I think the number of actions closed in the last year was 73. You know, so significant management action has gone into this already. We've talked in the past about a compliance newsletter, so tasks given out to every single manager in the organisation every quarter, and very clear expectations. Open audit actions was a key part of service planning this year. We had full compliance with all service plans reported by all areas, and this was one of the key actions within that. And as part of my answer to one of your previous questions about, you know, the enhancement to the assurance process, the new assurance board will add on top of that as well. But in terms of the point on the small works package, we did recently agree to additional resource going into the procurement team to enhance what's already there. at a time of which the proliferation of one-off funding that we're getting from government has really increased the level of procurement activity that we've undertaken, which has applied pressure to previously committed resource and has, exacerbated some of the challenges here. But notwithstanding that, the point Deborah makes about, making sure there's the requisite amount of focus within the operations area has been heard loud and clear, and I'm more than happy to provide assurance on that.
Thank you, Oliver. You happy with that answer? Thank you. Any further questions on this item? Okay, if not, we thank Deborah for the report, and members, you've had the opportunity to discuss and comment and make suggestions for any actions. So we will now move on to the next item, which is number 7, Corporate Governance Committee Progress Report. Habs, this one is for you. Hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you have the progress report in front of you. The first item is the Code of Procurement waiver procedure. There is 2 uses of the waiver procedure underway at the moment. I don't have the details as yet, but as soon as they're available, they'll be circulated to members in due course. With regard to the appointment of independent member to the Corporate Governance Committee, Council did approve the appointment of up to 2 non-voting independent members to committee at its meeting on 22nd of February. If members recall, at our committee meeting that took place in January, we also gave delegated authority to the chair and vice chair in conjunction with the committee to work out the final details. At this point, I'll ask Deborah for a brief update on where we are with that.
Thank you, Habs. Deborah.
So the short answer to it is not too much further, to be honest. We have some model job descriptions that we can use, and we have some that I have found on the websites of other councils that have done this. So what we need to do is sort of cannibalise into one that suits our own needs and then go ahead and do the recruitment. But again, it's just all a matter of time and resource to be able to do this. I think possibly a question for committee could be, do you want to wait until you've had an effectiveness review, sat down together and looked at your own skills analysis to decide what sort of person you want, or do we just go ahead with a generic job description and see who applies?
Yeah, we have talked about an effectiveness review, and I think that would be a useful thing for us to be doing. I'm not sure whether it needs necessarily to hold us up on the moving forward on finding the appropriate independent member or members. I think the 2 things can run in parallel, and I think that's the way I'd like to see it going. Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Gray.
Can I ask, Chair, whether you've got any sort of particular skills in mind that you'd like to bring or like to see come forward in these independent members?
So, independent members, obviously, we're looking for people who have core auditing skills. If the lady on my right was not a councillor, then she'd probably be a wonderful candidate for an independent member, but she is a councillor and she's going to stay a councillor. So, but that's the sort of core auditing skills is not necessarily the be-all and end-all, but that's certainly a key element of what we're looking for. I mean, if you look at the independent member who chairs the CPCA auditing committee, then that's I suggest a pretty good example of the sort of calibre of person that we'd love to have if we could find such a person. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, how will they be selected then? These is it going to be an advert in the paper, or how are you going to select them?
You're talking about finding candidates in the first instance, and then you're talking about finding candidates rather than doing a recruitment process. So the finding of candidates, Deborah, can you explain how we would do that?
Off the top of my head, I guess we would probably advertise it locally, because why not have somebody local, but also the Solace website as well. Go through them, because they're the type of person who might be looking at that. I don't know, we can also share one with other neighbouring authorities. So again, going local, we hope that somebody might, if they sit on another audit committee somewhere, they might be attracted to sit on ours at the same time.
which would be quite useful for benchmarking and comparative as well. Another skill set that they could bring to the table, I would have thought. But
last time we did this, Councillor Gray, can you ensure that I am actually right about this? The Communities Act of 2007, 2008, I think we had these members for the scrutiny committee. We had 2 members for the scrutiny committee, a lady that actually lived in the ward that I represent, so I have to be very careful how I behaved, and also a referee who was quite an interesting chap. And I think we actually got them through an advertisement, and then we sort of got 6 people interested, and a committee sat of 3 or 4 members and then chose who they thought would be the best candidates. But I think you must remember with Tony, these 2 people, Maura and, was it Coxhead, Roger? That's it, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, Councillor West. Thank you for that. Obviously, the skill set for a scrutineer is slightly different from that from somebody to sit on an audit committee, but nonetheless, that's the sort of the process would be, I imagine, not hugely different. Thank you. Any further questions or comments on this item? Okay, that's the last item on the agenda, so I'll close the meeting at this point, and thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you. Good night.